Who knows what Jay-Z, J.K. Rowling, Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey all have in common? Okay, I will tell you then. They have all overcome failure in one shape or form to go on to gain success in their respective careers. Welcome to My Perfect Failure. Join us as we delve into the world of our perfect failures. We will interview, explore, and discuss how our perfect failures can lead us to success. Join us and tune in.
Welcome everybody to another episode of My Perfect Failure. I'm super delighted because today we have an amazing guest for you. So my guest today is an author. He's a philosopher. He's a former entrepreneur. I didn't know whether to say entrepreneur, but I've gone for former entrepreneur. He's a TEDx speaker. He's got lots of wonderful TEDx talks, which I will put on the show notes. He's a former musician and the founder of CD Baby, a digital music distribution platform for independent musicians, which he sold for $22 million and gave the money to charity, which is amazing, extraordinary. He's also the author of some amazing books. So the amazing books are Hell Yeah or No, Your Music and People, Anything You Want, and Useful, Not True. So a very, very warm welcome to My Perfect Failure, Derek.
Thanks,
How are
Paul.
you? How are you?
I almost interrupted you in that intro to say that even the fact that I sold my company was actually quite a big failure for me, but we can get into that later.
Well,
I'm serious. I'm not being sarcastic. It was actually one of my biggest failures in life was
really? I didn't
me
know
selling
that.
my company.
I didn't know that. Maybe that's a good place to start, and then we can.
Sure, if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to. Because it sort of feels quite organic because it kind of hit you as a thought. So yeah.
Yeah. So I started this company like most of us who. No, let me say. There are different reasons somebody starts a company. Sometimes people just say, I want to make a lot of money. What can I do? But other times it's somebody who's doing something that they love. Say you love baking cookies, and then everybody tells you how wonderful your cookies are, and friends keep asking if they can have your cookies, and you think, you know what? I think I'm going to start a little business selling my cookies, but you're doing it because you love it, not to get filthy rich,
Yeah.
right? So that was my motivation when I started my company. It was something I was doing as a public service. It was actually my way of giving back to the music community that had benefited me so much. So I had already been a pretty successful musician myself, and I started this company, as my way of giving back. So I did it for 10 years, and I loved it for 8 years. And those last couple years, things turned awful in the culture of the company. I let a couple rotten apples spoil the barrel, as they say. There were a couple people inside the company that just had a really negative attitude and just kind of sucked everyone else into their negative state of mind. And the company went from a really happy place to a really angry place, all within the course of about a year or so.
Very quickly.
Really instigated by a couple people quite deliberately. And I was just happy-go-lucky doing my thing, kind of unknowing that things had turned so bad, that the culture had rotted from the inside. And so by the time I went to address it, it was just a completely rotten basket of apples. Everybody was suddenly miserable, suddenly angry at me. And I thought of some options of what to do about it. I considered just shutting down the whole company. I considered hiring somebody else to run it, and I would just remain the owner. And I actually tried both of those two things. And in the end, I chose the third option, which was to sell. But to me, selling the company was an admission of failure. It was like, wow, I really screwed this thing up so badly that I have to just walk away from it. It's completely it's ruined. And it's funny, the usually when people say sorry for something, it's just kind of a nice, polite thing. You go, "Oh, thank you. Okay."
Yeah.
But there's one apology in my life that meant a lot to me, and it was about 5 years later after this happened. I get an email from a guy in Idaho who used to be one of my former employees. I didn't even really know him that well. I had 85 employees, and he was just somebody that worked in customer service. And
Yeah.
I remember Dan. We had talked a couple times, but I didn't know him that well. And he said, "Hey, Derek, my name's Dan. I used to work for you in customer service. I'm not sure if you remember." He said, "I just have to apologize." He said, "I'm running a little guitar teaching studio now, and I have employees for the first time, and I see how hard it is." And he said, "Now I look back at the way that we treated you back then." He said, "I don't know why we just suddenly decided that you were the cause of all of our problems and why we were so mean to you all of a sudden." He said, "But I just want to tell you, I'm really sorry. You didn't deserve that. I don't know why we did that." I was like, "Wow, thank you." Because yeah, it was like the single worst thing that ever happened in my life was how this company that I made out of love and hired a bunch of people that also seemed to be doing it out of love, like in service of the musicians, because it was a business selling
Yeah.
music for independent musicians directly, and how it turned so awful so quickly. I really saw it as like my biggest failure.
Yeah. Well, it must be incredibly difficult because invariably when we do something, particularly if you sell a company that you've put blood, sweat, and tears into over for 8, 10 years, I guess you kind of assume that you'll potentially sell when it feels right. You might
Oh
have.
no, oh sorry, Paul. I thought I was going to do it forever. I was like, this is it. I'm
Really?
going to do this for the rest of
Really?
my
I
life.
had no
Yeah, I
idea.
never wanted to sell. Sorry, I should have said that at the beginning. Like the fact that I had to sell was the failure because
Wow, that
I
must be
intended to do
okay.
this thing for the rest of my life. I was like, I love this. This is my service to the world. This is my sandbox. This is my Lego kit. I love having this company and I love doing this. And so, yeah, I wanted to run it forever. I didn't want to sell. So no,
Oh,
that
right,
was my failure,
amazing.
was having to sell.
Was that traumatic then? That must be traumatic because that's like your.
Very.
So CD baby is like your baby.
Yes, it was. Not anymore, but it
Yeah.
was. And yeah, I think it was probably the single most traumatic thing in my life was that experience I'm talking about, like that last year of these 85 people that I cared about
Yeah.
suddenly in like a group think way deciding I was their enemy and everything turning so sour that I had to just give up.
I know that you came to London. Did you come to London?
Yeah, actually, I was trying to simplify the story, but all of this that I'm describing happened while I was in Covent Garden staying at a friend's house is when I heard the recording of all of my employees having a meeting without me. Uh, July 10th, 2007, the worst day of my life. Um, I heard that recording that night while I was in Covent Garden of them having this meeting without me going, "Fuck him, we got to get rid of this guy." and and it's not like it wasn't like a company with shareholders and investors. It was just me,
Yeah.
like anybody who was baking cookies and started a thing. I was just the sole owner. I was paying everybody myself. And it was a little ridiculous that they were talking about how to get rid of me so they could run the company the way they wanted. But more than anything, it was devastating. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't imagine what that must have felt like at the time. And I guess it takes a while to get over that and to think about what next. How did you?
Oh, yeah. Talk about so to get over that. So, Paul, I think the biggest lesson I learned from this,
Yeah.
and I hope that anybody listening to this might be able to apply this to your own life someday, is for the first couple years after this happened, I was still telling this story that everything was their fault. Those rotten apples spoiled the barrel. Those bad people wrecked the culture of the company. Those mean people got into a group and tried to do a mutiny against me. Them. It was all their fault, those people. And after a few years, I had like a flash of an epiphany one night, and I went, oh, wait a minute. It's all my fault. It's like I created the culture that let that attitude flourish. I created the situation that let it amplify and get worse. I was too distracted doing other work to pay attention to the early signs and to take care of it early. Oh my God, this whole thing was my fault. And whether that's true or not doesn't matter. It felt better to believe that this was all my fault, because now in that mindset, I'm not the victim. Now,
Okay.
this is something I can learn from. This is something I can use to improve my future life. Whereas if you just blame others, you're left just feeling like the hopeless victim, just grumbling.
Yeah. No.
Whinging. I haven't been able to say that word in a while. I love that word. But yeah, when you decide that everything's your fault, it really helps you feel more powerful, uh, responsible, which we don't often think of that word of having two parts in it. Response able. I'm able to respond. I'm able to have a response. Um, I found it much more useful to me to think that this was all my fault.
Yeah. And it takes away, forgive me if you already said this, potentially takes away that the victim feeling that we can have.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if that persists, it really does us no favors. We're not able to move forward, and because we still got this thing that weighs us down, and every random moment we have, whether we're at the gym or whether we're having a coffee somewhere, or you know, I know that London is somewhere where you're Covent Garden, you might be having a pint or something, and you kind of think about, well, you know, these bloody people, I gave them an opportunity, I created this amazing company, and they have this meeting when I'm not even there. I'm not able to contribute to give them some clarity of, because you never know what's going on behind the scenes, do you? You kind of,
Right.
people have meetings, and we whip each other up into a storm, and we think, let's have a meeting, let's show you,
Yeah.
you know, who's boss. So just in relation to that situation, obviously you've gone on to do some extraordinary things, and you've been very consistent with TEDx talks and books, and you know, you're moving around different parts of the globe. And do you think that you would have done a lot of what you've done today if you hadn't gone through this episode? Would people be reading your books? Would you be on these TEDx talks?
No, that's what's funny about the common podcast question that people ask of like, if you could go back and tell
Mm,
your 20-year-old self something,
mm,
what would it be? Um, that question seems to imply that there's something you would like to change about your current life, something you wish you would have done differently. But I love everything now.
mm,
So I think most of us feel the same way, that even if you can look at your past and see some big, giant mistakes, failures, whatever you want to call them in your past, it got you to where you are now. And I think most of us are happy about that. I'm sure some aren't.
yeah, that's
But
brilliant.
yeah, it's you're thankful for the way that something might have knocked you off your trajectory
Mm,
that you were on
mm,
and onto a different path, even if it's just in the name of adventure. Um, yeah, I'm very
yeah.
thankful.
No, well, that's interesting, because having, you know, doing this podcast and speaking to so many fabulous people, and everyone's got their own story. This podcast comes from my own failure. So, and you know, if I hadn't failed, or perceived that I failed, I wouldn't be talking to you now, or have spoken to all these other amazing people. So
Yeah.
it was kind of worth it. It was worth going through that episode to get to this point where I'm enlightened on a weekly basis. So it always strikes me as really interesting when you speak to so many different types of people from different parts of the world and how their life now in the present moment, there's so much. When I say they're so much happier, maybe it's easier to say they're happy now because you're in the present, but
Yeah.
in the past, when they were, CD baby or whatever they were doing, obviously they were happy then. But it's reassuring to me that we can transition from that difficult moment, failure, whatever you want to call it, to a moment where actually you think in the present, actually, I'm happier now than I was then.
Right. We are resilient
Yeah.
creatures.
Yeah.
You could pluck any of us up from where we are and put us on the opposite side of the earth in an opposite situation, and it would take a little bit of time to adapt, and we'd find a way to be happy.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing moment to moment every day, is finding a way to make the best of what we've got and make it work out. So, yeah, if something knocks us off course, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's nice to remember that when you're thinking about the future and you think, "Oh god, but what if I do this wrong? What if it goes bad?" It's like, "Well, then something else will happen, and I'll make the best of it, and it'll be fine."
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes it's very, for some of us, and I've definitely been in this place where it's easier not to try and maybe do something that feels a little bit of a challenge. I may need to expose myself in terms of acknowledging to somebody or to people that I'm going to change careers, or I'm going to try and write a book, or start a company.
Yeah.
Because you kind of, at some point you've got to acknowledge it, and then it can seem as, slightly, it can feel a bit of a stretch, and then sometimes that can actually stop us from actually doing it, because I don't want to be exposed as somebody that wasn't able to achieve something. And I think
Yeah.
that's quite interesting to me, because I've definitely been that person at times. I was listening to something
Mhm.
earlier where Stephen Pressfield talks about the resistance. It's, he
Yeah.
took a while to write a book. He eventually got there. Your book, Hell Yeah or No, you talk about minimizing decisions, make sure that you make smart decisions, and if it doesn't feel right, then potentially isn't the right thing to do, and that can help you whittle down. It can help you get to the point where that resistance becomes a little bit easier. And I think for a lot of us that's a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, it it helps to notice which paths are feeling easier or more enticing. Yeah, sometimes I think of it as what's more enticing right now, because sometimes it can be the challenge. If you've been stagnant for a while, if you've been a little bored, then the exciting, mysterious thing is not necessarily the easiest, but boy, it's the more enticing path. Uh, but other times, if you've been pushing yourself too hard for too long, then something a little easier can be more enticing right now. You just have to notice your compass.
Yeah. So you get to that point where you know where your compass is going, and then you can lean into that. So as I was researching you, I kind of alluded to before we kicked this off, before we started recording, that I stumbled across one of your numerous TEDx talks, and the one that really resonated with me for this discussion was the TEDx talk you did for in India. Why we need to fail, and I thought you beautifully cascaded 3 different elements that we all can maybe use and adopt. He talks about learning because we get to learn, and growth mindset, which I definitely have been someone that definitely has leaned into the fixed mindset previously. I think I'm better now. Hopefully I am. And experiments. And I thought that was a wonderful overview of things that we can do to not be, I guess, afraid to try things and potentially fail.
Thanks. Yeah, Anybody listening, if you go to YouTube and you searched Derek Sivers fail, I think it should pull it up. But
Yeah.
it was a conference called Inc. INK that was set up by a woman, Lakshmi Pratri, that had been involved with the TED conference for years and years and years. And she was originally from India, but had been living in California for decades. But she moved back to India and said, we need something like TED here in India. So she set up INK, like kind of like TED. So I think it stands for innovation and knowledge or something like that, and asked me to speak. So yeah, so you can find the talk on YouTube, and any fan of this show might like it. It's only 16 minutes long or something. But something you won't see in the video is their entire uh, sound system and lights and everything failed in the middle of my talk. It was kind of funny. I was up there talking to a room of 500 people about failure, and suddenly everything went down. The lights went out, the sound went out, and took about a minute to come back on. And I thought it was perfectly appropriate in that talk, but they edited it out of the video.
So what was good about that? You were able to, the show went on, and we still got
Yeah,
to.
it's fun. It's I've learned this thing in customer service running a company is when something goes wrong, you get to shine. Like
Yeah,
if a customer gets the wrong book in the mail, uh, and then they contact me to say, "Hey, you sent me the wrong book," how you handle those moments
yeah,
can make them love you even more than if the mistake had never happened. Um, and we all love seeing bloopers
yeah,
from your favorite TV show or movie when you see those little scenes
yeah,
of the outtakes and you see the actors delivering their line wrong and then cracking up. It endears you to someone when you see them mess up. Well, it depends how they mess up. Every now and then in those blooper reels, you see somebody who's wound a little too tightly,
yeah,
and when somebody messes up, they get angry, and you're
yeah.
like, "Oh wow, he seemed like a nice guy, but well, it looks like he's kind of a jerk behind the scenes." Um, uh, and you know what that happened to? The TV show Seinfeld.
I love Seinfeld. I'm a massive
So,
fan of Seinfeld.
so of those four main characters, uh, three of the four would mess up all the time,
Mm,
especially Jerry and Elaine, Julia Louis-Dreyfus. The two of them would like mess up their lines all the time and just be cracking up. And it was the guy that played Kramer, Michael Richards,
mm,
that was just not have every time somebody would mess up, he would just like, ugh, he'd get so angry at people for messing up. It was really interesting to see that he was not a lighthearted guy. Who knows? Maybe he was just really into his role. But anyway, sorry for the rest of us. The point is that when you mess up, especially in public, you may find that it's the most endearing thing you've ever done. Confidence is attractive, but vulnerability is endearing.
yeah, yeah. I think your book, Music and People, I think it was Music and People, you talked about when you got bad advice from, I think, a lawyer
Oh yeah.
about how you're going to pivot your career, and he took you totally down the wrong road by, I think he got you to start a label. Is that
Yeah, it was objectively good advice. It was just the
okay?
wrong advice for
Okay,
me.
okay. But how did you transition from that moment? Because that was, I guess, something that at the time probably wasn't the best situation for you in terms of how you wanted your career to shape at that time.
Yeah. Um, well, looking at it positively, you could say that because my music career didn't take off more,
Mm,
because I didn't become the next Prince or Taylor Swift, that's why I started CD Baby, which ended up doing more good for the world
okay.
than if I had just put some more songs on the radio, you know? Um, so yeah, in a way, I could be thankful that that guy gave me the wrong advice for me. Again, so audience, I just have to, if you're listening, I just have to explain. I was pursuing a career as a musician, trying to be a successful musician that you would hear on the radio, uh, and a music industry lawyer in New York City liked my music a lot, took me aside, and basically told me to follow the Puff Daddy model,
Yeah.
which was to start a record label, not just be an artist, but be an artist and a label owner, sign some other artists, be the boy with the Midas touch. And he said, you do that and I can get you well into the seven figures,
Mm.
advance from a bigger label. And he said that that's the path I think you should take. And I went home with my shoulders slumped, going, yeah, he's right. That's what I should do. But it just killed my enthusiasm for
Yeah.
it. And so it's important to notice that when you ask advice from people, the advice they give you might be objectively good advice. That might be a good strategy, but they just don't know you as well as you know yourself. You always have to filter their advice through your own preferences and your own soul to know if this is right for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've definitely had, you can even have it doesn't have to be work, it can be a social with friends, and somebody says, come and do this, come and do that. And not quite sure about that, but I might end up doing it. And it's never the best. And I've kind of like I've given in to their skills at persuasion.
Yeah.
And they have an amazing time. They have an amazing time, but it might not be for me. And yeah, I totally get that.
Actually, Paul, I've never talked about this on the air. I just 6 months ago broke up a 2-year-long relationship that was basically a romantic version of that. I was trying to live the life that she wanted. I was trying to be a good husband, a good domestic partner. I'm just not a very domestic person, but because she was such a good person and she really wanted a very domestic life, I was trying to be domestic for her. And I was doing all of the things that I should have. I was doing the right thing, but I was doing it for her.
Yeah.
But inside for me, it was like it was not pleasing me. I felt like I was kind of in the act of service at all times.
Yeah.
For hours a day, every day, I was doing everything for her until finally after 2 years, it just broke.
Yeah.
And I just said, I can't keep doing this. This just isn't the life I want. I'm doing it for you. And that was that. But yeah, we can even get into big mega situations like that, where we are doing things for others, not ourselves.
Well, I think it's
I
easily done.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, carry on.
I was going to completely change the subject. What were you going to say?
Oh no, I like to go with the organic, so please do.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say that I suspect that my next book might be called Selfish, because I think it's an underrated subject. I think we think of selfish as a negative word, as a criticism, as an insult. But I think more of us should be a little more selfish. And I think it's an interesting subject to dive into a little deeper, to look at.
I love where you're going with this, because I like it's almost like a contradiction in terms of selfish. So when you say the word selfish, people think, well, that person's selfish. They think, well, they have a negative connotation. But
Yes.
If, well, I can't think of a better word. Someone say pandering to the situation and just doing something, and it's almost becomes disingenuous, because it's when you do something for somebody, they would ideally, I guess, they would hope that we're doing something. If you use your case, being domesticated, or we go to dinner with somebody when we don't, that they would hope that we're doing these things because we want to. But it's probably nicer to say, actually, you know what? I use dinner as an example. I think that maybe I'm not the best person for you to go for this particular dinner with, because I don't really like going out for dinner. I prefer to be at home and just watch TV or read a book, or to have a glass of wine at home. I'm just not a dinner person. I can imagine this. I can imagine, I don't know how it would be used, but I can imagine this type of discussion in a sketch in Seinfeld.
Yeah. Well, think about also our social media ubiquity these days, that so many people are doing things for others, doing things for how it looks to others, uh,
Yeah, yeah.
going and doing things because it looks good on their Instagram,
Mm,
um, posting ideas on Twitter that they think will get applause from others. Whereas, so I think that this cultural slow pendulum has gone too far in the service of trying to please others. And I think it could be a nice
yeah,
reminder that
yeah,
we should be doing more to please ourselves, because it's also more sincere.
yeah.
It's more optimized for your own effectiveness and joy, your own personal
Mm.
path.
That's
Whereas
interesting.
constantly trying to do things for others, I think can be just create a lot of friction for everybody. Like you just said too, you would be a bad dinner guest. You'd be
Yeah.
a
That
bad
was
dinner guest tonight. Yeah.
because the thing is, you have that scenario where you've been invited to dinner, and literally all day you've been thinking about, I don't want to go to this dinner. I just don't want to go to this dinner. And then you meet them at the restaurant, and you just have to, you hug and you embrace. How wonderful to see you. What should we have to eat? And but for the previous 8 hours or 10 hours, you've been thinking, how can I get out of this dinner? I don't want to go to this dinner.
Yeah.
But then we just act, and we become an Oscar-winning actor as soon as we see them, and they think, okay. And then and the thing is, you know what happens then? We compound the situation, because before we leave, we must do this again.
Hmm.
And it's like,
Yeah.
okay,
You know, it's funny. I get lots of interview requests, podcast requests from people that want to talk business and entrepreneurship.
mm,
And I just don't want to talk about that stuff anymore. So no matter how popular the podcast is,
mm,
if it's clear that they want to talk about how to make your first $1 million or how to start a business, I just say, sorry, I don't want to. And they say, no, we could talk about other things too. I'm like, no, I just know that your audience just wants to hear about how to get rich. And I
mm,
just don't want to talk about that. I'll be a bad guest.
yeah,
So I just have to say no to those things. So I think it helps to connect with your own inner core or your own desires and be honest about it. And it really helps to have a template way of saying no. Like once I wrote a form letter by email once, and I just saved it, um, that said basically, um, so sorry, can't do that. I've really got my head down in my work. I'm really focused in trying to finish this book.
mm,
The only way I'm going to get this done is by saying no to almost everything until
yeah.
this is done. So sorry I can't do this thing. I wish you the best with it. Let me know how it goes.
It's
And this
brilliant.
isn't a permanent no. Like maybe in the future.
Yeah,
Yes, it's very kind of British of me to like over elaborate
yeah,
an apology. But uh so I just saved that letter, and so now I use it many times a week
mm,
when people are asking me if I'll meet up so they can pick my brain. I go, "Pachoop, send."
yeah,
They say, "Hey, would you like to appear on this How to Get Rich podcast?" Pachoop, send.
yeah,
Uh, it's really handy to
mm,
uh, write your no in advance and just have it ready, and then a verbal version too. So I have if I'm just on the phone with somebody who's asking me to even if it's like, hey, you should totally come to Detroit so we can hang out or whatever. I don't even do the fake thing of, oh, yeah, we totally should,
yeah,
because it feels insincere. I'm lying in that moment, and that feels bad. So I just have a shorthand way of saying, it's probably not going to happen, but that's all right. Thanks
yeah,
for the invitation. That was really sweet of you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because I love that, because I'm not very good at saying, I think I'm better now. I don't get the type of request you do, but I'm not very good at, and mine can be random things. It can be just anything, just innocuous things.
Yeah.
But historically, I've definitely not been very good at saying no, but I'm definitely better now. But I've got one or two friends that literally from the moment we were at school, I might do a bunch of things for them. And I'm not bitter by any means, again, they're lifelong friends, but I would do all these things for them. And then I go, can you do this for me? Can you? No. So they actually don't even say no like that. They're like, no. And they just carried on. The conversation continued. I'm thinking,
Wow.
I'm thinking, wait, how can they say no without even? It's just almost on autopilot. And you know,
Mm.
these are things that today I amuse myself with. They just make me laugh because there's one or two friends I have, and I guess I got to the point where I was envious of them because
Mm-hmm.
they had this unique ability to say to say no pretty much on autopilot. And I was like, oh, how do you do that without actually having it some type of, I don't know, conscience? There's no conscience about it. It's just like, no. He might even go home to his partner and say, I can't believe that Paul keeps on asking me to do certain things after all these years. I've never once said yes. Still ask me.
Hey, well, rejection therapy.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I love it. Yeah, thanks. Before we recorded today, or in an email last week, you sent me a great video about a guy doing rejection
Oh, yeah.
therapy for himself. I love this.
Yeah, I love. Yeah, that was brilliant. He was a former guest, Tom,
Yeah.
and he sent me. We're actually in. I think it was another guest that introduced him to me, and I think I researched him. And I found this video, just going through, just similar to I found your video, just going online and find these things, and I was just like, wow, brilliant! It's it's a great skill to be able to do that. I don't know I don't know if he's done it since, but it's certainly I certainly found that funny. And something else I was keen to ask you about. One, reading your work, which I love, by the way. I I just got this you've got this ability to, when people come up against obstacles, which we all do in life, that there is always a way to think beyond that obstacle. You can think, actually, what next? And I'll give you an example. There's lots I could give, but I'll probably use this one as a starting point. I think it was Karen Palmer, who was a musician that I think she signed to a label, and I think that they thought that her albums didn't sell enough units. So what she did, I think she left it. You might be able to fill in the blanks, but I think she left the label. And so I think she put on events, but people were invited. If they wanted to contribute, they could come. I think they could buy tickets, or they could just contribute, or they could just maybe, a donation, give a donation. And I
Are you
think
talking
that,
about Amanda Palmer
yeah,
from
Amanda,
Dresden?
not Karen,
Amanda Palmer, yes.
Amanda.
Okay.
What I loved about that was the creativity around doing something different, and being not being totally compromised by the record company. Which I guess, if a record company, not having worked in the music industry, I can imagine it being quite a challenging environment. And the music, particularly the majors, I get the feeling that they wield significant power. So for an artist to come up with something quite ingenious, and maybe untested, I don't know whether she knew anybody had done that before. She just thought, actually, I'm just going to do this, and it worked.
Yeah. That's, but isn't that the spirit that we all should be taking to life? It's like, if you're going to choose the normal path, well, then you're just going to get a normal life. If you want an
Mm.
extraordinary life, you have to make extraordinary choices. If
Yeah,
you want an abnormally successful life, you need to make abnormal choices. You can't just follow the normal path and expect greater than normal results.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, so I think in any given situation,
And
you
that,
can look at your choices and say, okay, here's the well paved path that goes this
Mm.
way, or another well paved path that goes this way. But what if instead, if I climb that tree
Yeah.
and I don't follow the path, or what if instead I curl into a ball and roll down that hill? I'll stop with the metaphor, but there's usually a better, more direct way to go for what you want
Mm.
than following the usual rigmarole.
Yeah.
Uh, so I love that Amanda Palmer did that. Uh, a lot of independent musicians did that in the late 90s too, when the internet first got popular and MP3s revolutionized a lot in the music
Yeah.
business. When musicians said, oh my God, wait, so to get my music from my fingertips to my audience's ears, I don't need Sony. I don't need
Yeah.
EMI
Mm.
anymore. I can just get it directly to my fans.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this changes everything. That was huge. Uh, and yeah, you could say it was the same thing with shows. Punk bands did a lot with that too. They would just skip the whole Ticketmaster thing. They would even skip the usual venues. Like a typical bar music venue would say, we don't want uh, your type here. And so they'd say, all right, fine. Here's an empty car park. We'll just do it here.
Yeah.
And they just put on a show there and just have people show up and pay what they want. And it's such a great spirit. Um,
It's do you personally, do you like the creativity of being able to maybe look at a different way of doing something when we come, when you use that car park example, but it could be any given situation. But should there's something that you said, I forget in relation to what you said it, but it was around the idea that we should view situations as
yeah.
and it could, the same analogy be applied to when we come up against perceived roadblocks.
Yeah. Anything. I mean, yeah, Paul, that's like my whole way of living. That's what I'm doing here is constantly at any given moment every day, anytime I'm presented with a situation, I acknowledge the norm, I
Mm.
acknowledge the tradition, and then I immediately feel free to completely dismiss it, disregard it, and think creatively for a second about what are some better ways to uh, be who I want to be, to get what I want,
Mm.
to get the desired outcome. Uh, maybe, uh, again, I'll just use a dumb metaphor. Maybe I thought I needed to climb that tower to get a nice view, but maybe just a picture of the view is sufficient.
Yeah.
Uh, and you can extrapolate that metaphor into many things in life. Some people think that they need to be rich or famous to be happy, but you find out, no, you can actually just go directly to being happy. Instead, it's a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah.
And you could do it
Yeah.
today instead
That's
of
it.
needing to
Yeah.
put it off for 10 years. There are ways of doing this. Or, yeah, a lot of people think that they need to be popular on social media in order to feel loved.
Mm.
But if you realize that that's what you're doing, you can just go straight for finding a, a way to feel loved in a more real way that doesn't require looking at clicks and
Mm.
being stupid online to get people to react. I know these are all dumb examples, but
Yeah.
hopefully
No,
anybody listening to this,
I totally
you'll
get it.
find your own version.
I
Yeah.
totally get it. It's going to be interesting in I don't know how many years time, but in 50 years or 40 years, 30 years, when we look back at social media. But I wonder whether we will actually. I'm just wondering whether we will look back at the way that we're all, not we're all, but the majority of people fixated on social media and clicks and likes and all that stuff. And we might look back and think, what were we doing? What were they doing?
Yeah,
What happened? Mum, Dad, were you on? Were you on? Were you so dependent on clicks? Were you?
right. Yeah.
I don't know how it will go, but it'll be interesting to see, because it's kind of like, not real, and it will go after things that, and likes by people that we'll never ever meet,
Yeah.
that we don't even know their values. Are their values in line with ours? And who are these people? And what am I? And why do I feel? Why do I get adrenaline by getting a like by somebody that I don't know? I'll never ever meet. It's just
Yeah.
and that's control, isn't it? That's sort of a control of an algorithm has over me, my body, my thoughts. So it's weird.
My
Uh,
shorthand is I would rather win the admiration of 10 people I respect than a million people I don't.
yeah. Mm,
Oh, wait, I think I had back. I'd rather win the respect of 10 people I admire rather than a million people I don't. Because I
mm,
shouldn't say I don't respect those million people. No, but I don't admire those million
mm,
people. Yeah, that's why I never pursued anything on television. Television to me seems to be, if you pursue that audience, you're really opening yourself up to the couch potato masses that don't appeal to me. That's why I prefer writing books, even though that limits my audience by 99%. People who not only buy a book but actually read it. um, that may cut my audience by 99%, but that's deliberate. I'd rather engage with the kind of people that read books.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting as well, because you really get to, if you know your audience and you know what, I guess what should be most important to us is, what excites us, not what drains us. And if we're able to channel into that, then you would think the law of averages that we're going to connect with the right people for us. So Derek, it's been fabulous having you as a guest on my perfect failure. I've really enjoyed researching you, learning about your fascinating journey. I'm kind of excited to learn about your next book. Will it be selfish? If it is, I'll be delighted that
Oh,
it
sorry,
was first.
my next book, I'm still writing my next book called Useful Not True. And I alluded to this mindset earlier when I said this epiphany that I had after 2 years of saying that everything at my old company was their fault, their fault.
Mm,
And then suddenly I went, oh, what if I think of it all as my fault? So somebody could rightfully argue to say, actually, Derek, that the truth is it was their fault. They did this thing. Actually, it wasn't your fault. And I say, I don't care. I don't care what's true in this case. It's more useful for me to believe that that was my fault.
mm,
That
okay.
mindset is more useful to me. Don't bother me about whether that mindset is true or not. Um, Another similar example that we all have probably heard is that if somebody is racing through traffic, being a real jerk and cutting people off and honking their horn, uh, you could get angry, and we all have a knee-jerk tendency to get mad first. But then you could tell yourself, maybe that person has a sick child in the back of their car that they're racing to the hospital. Maybe I should relax and be more empathetic. Maybe other people on earth are going
Mm,
through a hard time and this whole thing
yeah.
isn't just about me. Okay, so it's probably not true that there's a sick child in the back of that car, but man, it's useful to think that there is. It helps you feel better. It helps get you out of your own head. It calms you down. So I'm writing my next book about mindsets that are useful, not true.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And yeah, so I'm excited for that. Is that something that we can expect imminently, or
Yeah, in a few months. I'm
really?
writing it right now, and as soon as it's
Really?
done. So hey, anybody listening to this show, go to my website and say hello. Go to sive.rs, and you'll see there's a link to email me. I read every email. I reply to every email. It's the main reason I do podcasts like this is I really love the people I meet
Yeah.
uh, that contact me after hearing it. So please do.
Yeah, no, I'm excited by that. I love the idea of having mindsets that can enable us and support us. And because we get so wrapped up in unhelpful situations when we apply the right mindset. So that's interesting. So with a mindset, by applying the right mindset, it's almost that we can pick out the right mindset at that time when we potentially could explode or just handle something in a very different way with the wrong mindset.
Yeah. I'm going to argue that we should not be thinking about whether it's true or not,
Yeah,
but just think what would be
yeah.
more useful for me to believe right now? What would help me be who I want to be?
Because that's what I like about it. I like the fact that it's almost we can tailor make the right mindset to help us, because it ultimately helps us out
Yeah.
in a situation when we need it to, whether
Yeah.
it be a relationship, an argument with somebody at work, a traffic example you used. So, and that happens every day. If you lived in London on the tube in the morning, when somebody has taken a seat that you had been waiting 10 minutes for, they've just literally beat it to, and you think, that was my seat.
Yeah.
Derek, thank you so much. There is one question I would love to ask you, and this is the recurring question. So, if you
Yeah.
could invite three inspirational people for dinner, and they can be alive or they can be past, who might you invite?
So, Paul, I'm glad you emailed me this question in advance. I actually spent over an hour thinking about it.
Really?
I turned to my diary, I considered many options, and my real sincere answer
Mm,
is that I refuse the question
okay.
because I don't want to meet my heroes. I
Okay.
think it's better to acknowledge that somebody's influence on you can
Mm,
be at its best when it's through their work that they've poured their best self into.
mm,
The actual person that made that work might not be somebody you really want to get to know. It might actually be uninspirational
mm,
to meet the real person behind a work that really inspired you.
mm.
So I do not want to spend any time with any of the people that have inspired me.
No, I get it. I get it. Yeah, I do get that, because you can, because we have a vision, don't we? We have a vision of who people are and what they mean to us, and what, because of
Yeah.
how they've impacted us over the years. So
I'll
I
tell you one tiny story and we'll leave it at that. Is that
okay.
I was and am a huge James Brown fan, specifically James Brown from 1966 to 1974. That
Okay.
whole like super
Yeah.
bad sex machine,
Yeah.
funky president, like that deep funk time in there. I love his music in that range so much that I named my band Hit Me because that was his famous, 1, 2, 3, hit me. So I named my band Hit Me. A massive James Brown fan, pictures of him on my wall. So in the year 19 oh, what year is it? Yeah, the year 1992. I was working at Warner Brothers, Warner Chappell Music Publishing in New York City, Manhattan, Rockefeller Center, and everybody knew what a big James Brown fan I am. And on some random Tuesday morning, they said, "Oh, Derek, guess who's coming to the office today? James Brown." They said, and it's a little office with only 15 people. So they said, "You're finally going to meet James Brown today." I thought about it for a second. I was like, guys, I'm going homesick. I don't. I do not want to meet James Brown, and
Really?
I don't even want the random chance, even if I hide in my office, I don't want the random chance that somebody's going to knock on my door and say, "Hey, Derek, I want you to meet somebody." Like, I do not want to meet this guy. I respect him too much. His music had
Mm,
such a huge influence on me. I love it so much that I don't want the meeting the guy to ever influence my love of his music
mm.
either direction. My love of his music cannot be greater. So
Yeah.
therefore I do not want to meet the person. So I literally had somebody take over for me that day. And at 10:30 in the morning, I went home sick for the rest of the day. And the next day, people told me like, "Oh yeah, we all met him in the pictures," and shook his head. "Oh, what a guy!" And I'm like, "No, glad I didn't meet him." So
And
there's
you were
my
still glad
proof.
after speaking to
Sorry,
everybody.
what?
And you were still glad after speaking to everybody.
Oh yeah, yeah. Even if he's a great, wonderful guy, I don't care. I'm glad I didn't meet him. What I love is his music. I think it's really healthy to separate the person from their work. And it's his work that I love. I don't need to love the person that made the work.
Yeah.
And even if I did, I don't want to. Yeah. So there's my proof that that is my real answer to your wonderful question.
That is fabulous proof, because James Brown, is an icon, or was an icon, and still is in pretty much everybody's eyes. Yeah. So I definitely accept that. So Derek, thank you. It's been amazing to meet you. So listen to all your books, read your books, and to have you on a podcast is a dream. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning into this episode of My Perfect Failure. We're always keen to grow the show, so please do let us know anything you like, or things you like, but equally things you don't like. We're keen to hear about everything. And if you know anybody that is looking to transition and really to overcome setbacks and failures, please do share this episode. So until the next time, take care for now.
Thanks for listening to My Perfect Failure podcast. Be sure to visit www.myperfectfailure.com to join the conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play. Look out for our next episode.